The folded note landed on the table between us like it weighed nothing. My brother didn't even look up from his phone when he pushed it toward me. 37 people in that conference room, most of them his colleagues from the firm, and he slid it across the polished mahogany like he was tipping a coat check girl. "For the drive home," he said. I looked down. 2 20s and a 10. $50. I didn't move. I kept my hands in my lap and looked at that money sitting there under the overhead lights. And I thought about all the ways I could respond. I thought about the 7 years I'd spent building something he didn't know existed. I thought about the call I'd gotten that morning, the one I couldn't take at the table because I'd stepped outside and spent 14 minutes on the phone with a federal prosecutor's office about a case that was about to change things for about 11,000 people in 3 states. $50 for the drive home. I picked it up, folded it once, put it in my jacket pocket, and said nothing. That was the moment I knew the dinner was over for me, even though we still had 2 courses left. My name is Sloane. I'm 31 years old, and I've been a federal public defender for 4 years. Before that, I clerked for a circuit court judge for 2 years. Before that, I graduated second in my class at Georgetown Law. Before any of that, I grew up in a 3-bedroom house in Columbus, Ohio, where my brother Cameron was the one the whole family talked about. Cameron is 4 years older than me. He went to Ohio State undergrad, then got his MBA from Michigan. He works in private equity now, something with commercial real estate restructuring. He wears good suits. He talks about equity multiples at dinner like other people talk about the weather. My dad has Cameron's business card in his wallet. I saw it once when he was looking for his credit card at a gas station, and he didn't seem embarrassed about it. I was the one who went away for law school and never really came back. Not because I didn't love my family, but because the version of success my family understood had a salary attached to it, and mine didn't look like that. Federal public defenders in the 6th Circuit don't make what private equity guys make. I knew that going in. I chose it anyway, because there's a particular kind of work that finds you if you're paying attention, and when it found me, I didn't walk away from it. My family didn't understand that. Or maybe they just didn't try to. My mom would ask, at every holiday, whether I was still doing the public defender thing, like it was a phase, like I was going to come to my senses and join a firm with marble floors in the lobby. My dad would redirect conversations toward Cameron's deals whenever my work came up, which wasn't often, because most of what I worked on I couldn't fully discuss, active cases, sealed proceedings, things that required discretion, and Cameron had a way of summarizing my career in one sentence whenever he introduced me to his friends. "She works for the government" was the version he used most. Technically accurate, completely hollow. I'd stopped correcting him somewhere around year 2. The dinner where he gave me $50 was a firm anniversary event. Cameron's company had been operating for 10 years, and they were celebrating with a catered dinner at a private dining room downtown. He'd invited our parents, his wife, 2 of his business partners and their spouses, and me. I'd driven in from Cincinnati that morning. 4 hours. I'd taken a personal day, which I don't take often. I wore my good navy blazer. I got there early. The first hour was fine. I talked to Cameron's wife, who is perfectly pleasant and who always asks me about my cases in a way that's polite but slightly wary, like she's worried I'm going to say something that makes her feel bad. I talked to one of the partners about his kids. I ate the bread. Then Cameron made a toast. He talked about building something, about the 10 years, about legacy. He mentioned our parents by name. He thanked his wife. He made a joke about how he was the only person at the table who still used a paper planner. He did not mention me. I was at the table. I had driven 4 hours. I was not mentioned. I told myself it didn't matter. I refilled my water glass and told myself it didn't matter. Then, during dessert, one of the partners asked Cameron about our family. Where we'd grown up, whether it was just the 2 of them, that kind of small talk, and Cameron said, "Yeah, just me and my sister Sloane. She works for the government. Just started getting her footing. Still figuring things out. Just started getting her footing." I was 31. I had argued before circuit court judges. I had won a case the previous spring that resulted in the overturning of a wrongful conviction for a man who had been in federal prison for 9 years. Still figuring things out. I didn't say anything. I watched the candle on the table, and I breathed slowly, and I didn't say anything. That was when he slid the $50 across to me. For the drive home, he said, gas is ridiculous right now. One of his partners laughed quietly. Someone shifted in their seat. My mom looked at her dessert plate. I put the money in my pocket. I thanked him. I finished my coffee. I hugged everyone goodbye. I drove home in 4 hours of dark, the $50 sitting in my jacket pocket the whole way, and I thought about it the entire time. Not with anger, exactly. More like clarity. The thing about being a public defender that people don't understand is that you don't have a title that means anything at a dinner table. You can't say, I restructured a $40 million portfolio or I closed a deal. You work in courtrooms that smell like industrial tina, and you have clients who call you from jail collect, and you do the work because you believe in it, and that belief is not a very good party trick. What you also can't say, most of the time, is what your actual cases involve, not the active ones, not the ones that matter most. So when my family asked what I was working on, I said, a case, or it's ongoing, or I can't really get into it. And they heard that as evasion, as embarrassment, as confirmation that there wasn't much to talk about. What I was actually working on in the months around that dinner was a case that had been referred to our office by a coalition of civil rights attorneys. A class of defendants across 3 federal districts, people who had been charged, convicted, and sentenced under a set of sentencing guidelines that our office believed had been applied with systemic bias. 42 individual cases, 9 years of appeals and motions and sealed affidavits. I had joined a case 2 years in, and for the past 14 months I had been the lead attorney. I couldn't talk about it. I couldn't explain what I was doing or why it mattered or what was at stake. I just went to work and drove back from Columbus with $50 in my pocket. I want to be careful here about something. I didn't stay silent because I was afraid of Cameron. I want to be clear about that. I stayed silent because I had made a choice about what deserved my energy. And defending myself at a dinner table to someone who had already decided what I was worth. That wasn't it. That's a distinction that matters to me. There's a version of the story where I'm the passive one, the quiet sister who couldn't stand up for herself. That's not what happened. What happened is that I understood something Cameron didn't, which is that the most powerful position you can be in is the one where you don't need anyone at that table to see you clearly. I had built something. It was real. It existed, whether or not he acknowledged it. I just didn't expect the moment it became visible to happen the way it did. In March, about 4 months after the dinner, Cameron called me. This was unusual. We texted occasionally, we saw each other at holidays. Actual phone calls were rare. He said he needed a favor. There was a reception being hosted by the Bar Association, the Columbus Bar Association, and his firm was a corporate sponsor. He had been invited to bring a table, and he was 1 person short, and could I come fill the seat? I said yes. I had a conference in Columbus that weekend anyway, so the timing worked. I didn't think much about it. The reception was at a hotel ballroom downtown. 250, maybe 300 people, attorneys, judges, city officials, a few state legislators. I'd been to events like this before, though usually in Cincinnati. Cameron met me in the lobby. He was in his best suit. He looked me over in the way he sometimes did, registering my appearance, calculating something, and said, "You look nice." Then he steered me toward the table and introduced me to his colleagues as, "My sister, she does government work." I smiled. I shook hands. I sat down. 40 minutes into the reception, the program started. There was a brief presentation. The Bar Association was honoring 3 individuals for distinguished public service in law. I did not know I was one of them. I want to be precise about that. I knew an award existed. My supervising director had mentioned months earlier that my name had been submitted for a Bar Association recognition. I had nodded and forgotten about it, the way you forget about things that feel abstract when you're in the middle of 42 active case files. I had not connected the invitation to this particular event. So when the association president walked to the podium and began reading names, and the 3rd name was mine, Sloane Mercer, Federal Public Defender, 6th Circuit, for her leadership on the multi-state wrongful conviction review project, I was genuinely still for about 3 seconds. Then I stood up. Cameron was sitting 2 seats to my left. I watched his face as I stood up. I watched the moment his expression moved from polite attention to something else. Confusion first, then a rapid recalculation happening behind his eyes. Then a look I can only describe as the face of a man realizing, in real time, that the architecture of something he believed was wrong. I walked to the stage. I shook the president's hand. I accepted the award, a framed citation and a small crystal piece with the Bar Association seal. I stood at the microphone. I did not look at Cameron while I spoke. I looked at the room. I thanked my clients, by which I mean the people I represented, the ones who had trusted us with their appeals, who had waited 9 years in some cases for someone to look at what happened to them and say this isn't right. I thanked my team, the 3 other attorneys in our office who had worked the case alongside me for 40 months without much recognition or visibility. I thanked the Civil Rights Coalition attorneys who had brought it to us in the first place. I spoke for about 3 minutes. Then I went back to my seat. The applause was still going when I sat down. Cameron did not say anything for a long moment. Then he said, "Why didn't you tell me?" I thought about that question. I thought about the $50. I thought about still figuring things out, and she does government work, and 4 hours on the road in the dark. "You never asked," I said. He asked on the drive back to the hotel afterward whether the case I'd led was the one he'd seen mentioned in the news. There had been a piece in the Columbus Dispatch a few weeks earlier about the wrongful conviction review, one of those stories that goes moderately regional without breaking through to national coverage. He said he'd read it. He hadn't connected it to me. I told him yes, that was the case. He was quiet for a while. We were stopped at a red light near the Arena district, and the city was dark and ordinary around us, and he said, "I didn't know you were doing something like that." "I know," I said. "Why didn't you?" "Because every time I started to explain what I was working on, you summarized it before I could finish. Or Dad changed the subject. Or someone asked you about your deals and the conversation moved." I didn't say this with heat. I said it like I was describing something I had observed from a distance. I stopped explaining because it wasn't being received. He didn't argue. That surprised me a little. We drove the rest of the way without talking much. The next morning, my mom called. Cameron had told her. She said, "Honey, why didn't you tell us about the award?" I thought about how to answer that. I thought about all the dinners. I thought about every still figuring things out and every redirected conversation and the way my job had become a polite blank in our family's vocabulary because it didn't fit the narrative we told about ourselves. "Mom," I said, "when was the last time you asked me a question about my work and waited for the whole answer?" She was quiet. "I love you," I said, "but there's a version of the family where I don't exist the way I actually am. I've been living with that version for a while now. I just didn't think it was worth fighting about." She cried a little. I let her. Then she said she was proud of me, and I believe she meant it, even if the timing was complicated. My dad called that afternoon. He said less than my mom did, but at one point he said, "I had no idea the work was like that." And I said, "I know, Dad." And he said, "I should have asked more." And I said, "Yeah, probably." That was as far as we got, but it was further than we'd ever gotten before. I want to be honest about something that's harder to talk about. After the reception, after the calls from my mom and dad, there was a part of me that felt the particular exhaustion of being seen belatedly. Because here is the thing, the work didn't change. What I had been doing in the months before that evening and what I was doing the morning after were exactly the same. The 42 clients didn't become more real because a bar association gave me a framed citation. The 9 years those people spent waiting didn't become more significant because Cameron recalibrated his assessment of me at a red light downtown. I had been doing the work. It was always the work that mattered. What changed was their map of who I was, not the territory. I have thought about this a lot since then because I don't want to tell a story that ends with me winning something and everyone realizing they were wrong, as if the point of the work was always to arrive at a moment where my family finally sees me correctly. That would be the wrong lesson. The right lesson, I think, is that you don't do the work for the people who aren't paying attention. You do it because it's yours. You do it because 42 people needed someone who believed that 9 years of waiting deserved a full and serious answer. You do it because when you're standing in a federal courtroom making an argument that you know is right, the opinion of someone who gave you $50 for gas has no relevance to what happens next. The recognition when it came was real. I'm glad it happened. I'm glad Cameron was in that room. I think it changed something between us, slowly and imperfectly, in the way family things change. Not all at once. Not completely. But enough that the dinners have been different since. But if he hadn't been in that room, the work would still have been what it was. That's what I want to hold on to. 3 weeks after the reception, Cameron called again. He said he wanted to take me to dinner. Just the two of us, no occasion, no firm event. We went to a place in the short north, good food, not too loud. We talked for 3 hours. He asked real questions, the kind where he stopped talking and actually listened to the answers. I told him things I had never told anyone in my family. About what it's like to sit across from someone in a county jail visiting room and tell them you're going to fight for them, knowing that fighting doesn't always mean winning. About the clients I'd lost, the ones where we did everything right and it still didn't matter. About the man whose conviction we'd gotten overturned, who cried in the courtroom in a way I had never heard another adult cry before, and how I drove home that evening and sat in my car in my apartment parking lot for 20 minutes before I could go inside. Cameron listened. He didn't redirect. He didn't summarize. At the end of the night, when we were splitting the check, he put his credit card down and said, "I owe you more than this, but I'm starting here." I laughed. It was the first time I'd genuinely laughed with him in a long time. "You don't owe me anything," I said. "But yeah, start here. That works. I still have the $50 actually, not the original bills. I spent those on a coffee and a tank of gas on the drive back to Cincinnati that night because I wasn't going to let them sit in my dresser as some kind of symbol. But I asked Cameron, a few months after the dinner at Short North, to give me $50, just 50 in cash. He looked at me for a second like he was trying to figure out if I was joking. I told him I wanted to frame it. He didn't say anything. He opened his wallet and handed me 2 20s and a 10. It's in a simple black frame on the wall in my office now, next to the Bar Association citation. No label, no explanation. My colleagues sometimes ask about it. I tell them it's a reminder. Of what, they ask. Of how small something can be, I say, and how little that has to do with what it's worth. I've thought a lot about why I kept that $50. Not the original bills. Those were gone by the time I hit the highway that night, traded for a large coffee and a full tank of gas on the way back to Cincinnati. But the idea of it stayed with me. The specific smallness of it. 2 20s and a 10, slid across a dinner table in front of 37 people who saw exactly what it meant. What I've come to understand is that Cameron wasn't being cruel in the way a villain is cruel. He was being indifferent in the way people are indifferent when they've already decided the story. He had a picture of me in his head. Younger sister, government job, still finding her footing. And that picture was so settled, so comfortable for him, that no amount of evidence to the contrary was ever going to reach him through a normal conversation. Not because he was a bad person, because he wasn't paying attention, and people who aren't paying attention don't update their maps until something forces them to. That's the thing about living quietly inside your own integrity. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't send newsletters. It just accumulates day after day, case after case, until one evening in a hotel ballroom, a bar association president reads your name into a microphone and the person who handed you $50 for gas is sitting 2 seats to your left. I didn't plan that moment. I didn't engineer it. What I did was show up every day to work that mattered, with clients who needed someone to take them seriously, and I did it without waiting for my family's permission to believe it was worth doing. That's the only part I controlled. The rest just followed from that. There's a version of my life where I spent those 7 years trying to prove something to Cameron, or to my dad, or to the particular silence my mom went quiet with every time I tried to explain what I actually did. I think that version of me would have been exhausted and bitter and probably less effective at the actual work because you can't fully give yourself to something while also monitoring whether the right people are impressed by it yet. The work I was doing. Fighting for people who had been waiting 9 years for someone to look at their case and say this wasn't right. That work required my full attention. It didn't leave room for the approval-seeking version of me to operate. And in hindsight, that was a gift. Not a comfortable gift, but a real one. What I know now is that integrity has a kind of compounding quality to it. You do the right thing when no one is watching, and then you do it again, and then again, and eventually you have built something that stands on its own, something that doesn't need Cameron to validate it in order to exist. The recognition at that reception was real, and I was glad it happened. But it was just a measurement of something that had been there the whole time. I framed those $50 because I wanted a physical reminder of that gap, the space between how you are seen and who you actually are. Most of us live in that gap at some point. The question is what you do there. Whether you shrink to fit the smaller version someone else has of you, or whether you keep going anyway, doing the thing that's yours to do, trusting that the territory is real even when no one else has the right map yet. I kept going. The map eventually caught up.